it is what it is. Here with reaction, former 2024 presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. You know, I'm watching the Democrats flailing. We keep reading reports. They're scared to death about Joe Biden as their candidate. And, you know, the fact that Donald Trump was convicted in this bogus trial in New York has not impacted his poll numbers. I would be scared, I guess, too. What is your reaction? You think they keep him at this point? Do you think they're afraid to keep him? Do you think there's a movement underground to get rid of him?
Look, I think the fact that the debate is taking place in June before the nominating convention of either party is the best sign, Sean, that is the final hoop they're making the old man Joe Biden jump through before actually getting the nomination. So if he exceeds expectations at the debate, he hangs on for a thread for that nomination. But if he falls short of those expectations, make sure and get ready. They're going to be trotting out somebody else for that nomination. And you know who's waiting in line is Hillary Clinton.
Okay. So what are the expectations going to be? Now, if I had to guess, we might see a little more energetic Joe. As a matter of fact, I would bet probably half of your income on it, or half of your net worth on it. I'm teasing. But with all due respect, I mean, I would imagine a lot of Red Bull's going to, you know, Joe's going to be drinking in the lead up to that debate, or whatever he was using or drinking, a lot of caffeine the night of the State of the Union. I don't think he's going to come in flat. I think he's going to be well rehearsed, and I think he's going to be wide awake, because I think he's going to drink a lot of caffeine or whatever.
This is his last shot, and the reality is caffeine or Red Bull, I think you're being very kind with that, Sean. Donald Trump was right. They need to do a drug test before that debate. But regardless of whether it's Biden or somebody else, what we as a party need to do is step up and actually define what we stand for. I think that's one of the risks of the path they're leading us down. We're criticizing Joe Biden, his agenda. I've done plenty of that. Others in our party have done that, too. That's not going to be good enough to win this election decisively as we need to. I'm worried we may be on track to have another red wave like we had in 2022, the one that actually never came. And so I think that the reality is we have to, regardless of who they put up, define what it means to be a conservative today, what it means to be an American today, revive those shared national values that we're supposed to be celebrating on D-Day, not go in the direction of political partisanship and toxicity in the direction that Hillary Clinton takes it, but in our own direction, actually stand for what it means to be a citizen of this country and stand for an actual alternative vision to that left-wing poison. And if I'm being honest, I don't think we've done a good enough job of that yet, and that's what our work is cut out for us this year.
Daily Mail Tip Survey, legitimate poll, reveals 70% believe that both candidates should undergo pharmaceutical screening before they face off in these debates, and only 18% think drug tests are unnecessary. Now, for high-performing athletes, they get drug tested all the time. Why wouldn't you do it for president, especially, you know, considering that what we witnessed at the State of the Union? I don't know if it was caffeine. I'm not going to venture a guess. I'm not a doctor, but it certainly was not the guy we see every day, was it?
No, it wasn't. But the reality is the American people deserve transparency. And we're talking about putting somebody in the office of the President of the United States representing this country when we are skating on thin ice. The American people deserve to actually be able to make that choice in an informed way. So, Sean, I do think that debate is the final step for Biden. If he underperforms there, that is the final straw. And you got to be prepared for a different puppet they're going to trot out.
Let me ask you then.
An unfortunate side effect of that is we're going to be hearing more from folks like Hillary Clinton.
Are you arguing that maybe Trump shouldn't go in for the kill and in that debate? In other words, that Trump should kind of lay back a little bit, just make his points and let Biden talk and maybe not fight as hard as he normally would strategically? Would that be a smart thing to do? Because I think it's better if he runs against Biden.
So, look, I think the smart thing to do is to actually make this A versus B. 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden. Compare the border, compare the economy, compare global stability and U.S. security risks. On every measure, Trump wins by flying colors. And that's a rare opportunity, Sean. This is a once-in-a-century opportunity for voters. The last time we had this was over a century ago, where you can actually compare the records of both people running. That's what Donald Trump, I believe, needs to stay focused on and will stay focused on. The reality is they're going to try to lure him in every other possible direction. That's what these prosecutions are about. But at the end of the day, focus on the record, focus on the vision for this country that makes Joe Biden and his old age irrelevant as Americans increasingly flock towards Trump, the right answer for this country.
Curiosity's getting the better of me. Are those boxing gloves over your right shoulder that I'm looking at? Is that what I'm looking at?
That's right. You got to be ready to fight. And sometimes you got to fight with the gloves off, Sean. And as I say, you got to be strong enough to protect your kindness. So we keep it kind, but we're going to have to fight when necessary.
Listen, I know because I train every day, I hit every day, and I hit hard. So I just happen to notice, although I usually wear MMA gloves. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.